All right. I'm so glad to have returning to Bad Faith podcast, Senator Nina Turner. You know her as one of the 4 co-chairs of the Bernie Sanders campaign. And also we covered extensively her runs for office, which I got to say, in Ohio's 11th district, have been back in the news again as people are having increased scrutiny at the role that APAIC and DMFI are playing in local elections because of the geopolitical circumstances. So I'm so glad to have you back here, Senator Turner.
Glad to be back with you, Joy.
All right. So the subject of today's conversation is mostly going to be on this new organization that you launched earlier this month to support striking workers. Tell us why you chose to start this org.
Well, Joy, the needs are so great. And as we see all across this country, we could even say internationally, but I want to focus on this country. Workers are rising up from various sectors to be very clear that they are not making living wages, that it is not okay, and that they need better wages, better benefits, and better work conditions. And that's from nurses to other medical personnel. We know that Kaiser, for example, right now, the biggest strike of healthcare workers in the country so far, to the UAW, the Teamsters actually settled before they had to go full-fledged. Amazon, Starbucks, you name it. Workers are rising up all over this country. And so part of the start of We Are Somebody is based on the past, the present, and the future. The past, in that there have been many sheroes and heroes who stood up for workers. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as we know, with the sanitation workers. Although Mother Jones is not featured in my video, but she definitely was a person who stood up for workers, coal miners in particular, and also stood up against children being violated in the workspace as they were, particularly in coal mines. And then Fannie Lou Hamer, her spirit is upon me as well, as she stood up for Black farmers. And we know she did other political things too. Everybody is somebody. Most people want the ability to afford housing, healthcare, provide for their family, and be able to take a vacation every now and then. While most corporations are seeing record profits, they aren't leading to record wages. Imagine that. CEO pay has skyrocketed over 1,000% since 1978. CEOs are paid 399 times as much as a typical worker. Workers deserve better. From the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. supporting sanitation workers in Memphis, to Fannie Lou Hamer's work for Black farmers in the South, to Asa Philip Randolph's work organizing the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and organizing the March on Washington, the fight for liberation has always been a fight for workers' rights. It is in this robust tradition that I am launching We Are Somebody, a capacity-building organization for the working class. Our first major initiative will be to put our full support behind the 21st century workers movement. We Are Somebody aims to serve as a bridge between those who support unions and workers and the workers who are putting their livelihoods on the line by withholding their labor and demanding better from their employers. Every worker is somebody. You are somebody. We are somebody. And if we are committed to putting a little extra on our ordinary, extraordinary things will happen for working class people in this nation. The cause is right, and the time is now. Help ensure that workers on the front lines are supported, protected, and funded. When I think about the present, it really was the coal miners of Alabama that really touched me so as I started to study their 2-year strike. And they had the leverage, Joy. They had a strike fund. They had over 1,000 of their employees join this strike, but they got walked down because the company knew that they can wait them out and that the strike fund would dwindle. And even though they did everything that they were supposed to do, even going to DC, trying to get people's attention, they made the sacrifices in 2016 to try to help the company that they were working for remain solvent. And they were promised that they would be made whole because of their sacrifices, and it did not happen. And so the major point for We Are Somebody is to be an organization that creates the atmosphere that amplifies, organizes, and funds workers, both unionized workers and non-unionized workers. But the major point, like the major lesson that I learned in studying the coal miners at Alabama, is that they lost their leverage over time, and they lost it because their strike fund that they had it dwindled away because big business, the corporation that they work for, waited them out. And so it is important that there is well, let me say it this way. There is no private sector type of entity quite like We Are Somebody. The ultimate goal, and we're not there yet, as you just laid out. We're about 3 weeks old now, today, as a matter of fact, is to create a multi-million-dollar strike fund.
Okay, so this is when you describe the organization as supporting striking workers, you mean principally or perhaps exclusively by raising money to support the striking efforts, namely the strike fund, raising strike fund cash.
Yeah, but even beyond that, I'm using those terms because they're terms that people probably understand, but this organization is going to support both unionized and non-unionized workers. So let me give you an example of non-unionized workers. One Fair Wage, for example, is a national organization, and they're putting ballot initiatives on ballots all across this country. There will be one in Ohio to do away with the sub-minimum wage. And you and I both know, and hopefully your listeners and viewers will know after this conversation, that sub-minimum wage is rooted in anti-Blackness in terms of predominantly Black women in those fields, and the restaurant industry itself not wanting to pay them a fair wage. This is where this comes from, and I encourage everybody to research this and to look up One Fair Wage. Well, those workers, restaurant workers, are not unionized. But according to their executive director, Saru, if We Are Somebody had existed for those workers, they would be more able to go out and fight against their employer because they would get some type of supplementation. And that is what is needed. Full salaries cannot be paid, but if we raise enough money, we can help to supplement. But even before we get all the way there, because multi-millions of dollars is going to take a little time to get there, but we're going to still organize, amplify, and fund workers. We have already received on our portal, and if people go to our wearesomebody.org, there's a special form for workers to fill out, whether they're unionized or not. So the major goal is to help them supplement where we can, amplify where we can, and also organize. And I also see our task, Joy, is to bring union and non-unionized workers together. We know most workers in this country are not unionized, but they still need the kind of help that We Are Somebody can bring.
So when you were speaking with the striking mine workers, did they give you some indication of how much more money, basically, for lack of a better way to say it, would have enabled them to be successful in their minds? Did it really boil down to being basically weighted out by the bosses?
It did. And I didn't get a chance to talk to them. I studied them and I followed their story, and they're part of my motivation. I didn't get a chance to talk to them, but yes, that is in fact the case. If we fast forward to UAW right now, and they have over $835,000 strike fund, $835 million, strike fund, but there are 145,000 employees. If President Fain, he's being very tactical and strategic by having rolling strikes. Now, I did go on the strike line for Local 573 right in our backyard, because I know you hometown girl, right in our backyard in Streetsboro, Ohio. And that's a parts plan. And I got a chance to talk to those employees. And what they're getting is $500 a week, but they're getting their COBRA paid for. Now, imagine if all 145,000 workers, though, went on strike at the same time. That $835 million strike fund would go away in about 3 months. So it is a lot of money, but it has to be used very strategically. And so that it gives them leverage, and also who they are. UAW gives them leverage too, just like the Teamsters had leverage too, because they're e-commerce. When we're dealing with other types of employees who might not necessarily have the same type of leverage, the money part does matter, so that their incomes can be supplemented some way, and that their health care can be paid for, so that they can hold the line a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, the UAW strategy has been really remarkable to look at. The overwhelming majority of Americans are supportive of the UAW strike, much to the chagrin of Jim Cramer, who keeps having these viral moments on his show where he's kind of incredulous that the majority of the public stands with the workers there.
I mean, where they got it. AP's got a piece this morning on public approval of either the automakers or the unions. You want to know percentage that favor the automakers?
Oh my!
It's like 6%, 9%, something below 10.
I was shocked at that. I thought that perhaps there would be people who say, you know what, I have a F-150, I love it, and they do a great job, and the workers are being greedy. And no, the workers the workers win.
That kind of brings us all.
And there was just a story out in the AP about an hour before we started recording that indicates that the United Auto Workers are edging closer to a tentative contract. We'll see where that goes. I wonder if you caught any of the debate that was happening on the left about the utility or the strategic value of doing rolling strikes instead of doing a more broad strike wave.
I think, the way Sharon Fain is doing it is it should give everybody a ray of hope. I think this is the better way to do it. Now, everybody might not have the same heft, though. So let me back up. One size doesn't fit all. So that's part of the debate. Will this work for other members of the House of Labor? Maybe, maybe not. I think it also depends on the industry. It depends on the impact of that industry. And it also depends on how hard a rolling strike will, in fact, hurt the very corporations who will not negotiate in good faith with their members. Now, for UAW, I want to remind our viewers and listeners that I'm old enough to remember when we bailed out the big three. That was in 2008 or so. We bailed them out under the Obama administration, President Obama's administration, for sure. And so it just really boggles my mind. And obviously, most of the American people are right with us on this as to how you can be bailed out by the taxpayers, but yet with a straight face, you can deny the very workers who stuck in there, who took the hits, they took the cuts, they made the sacrifices. And now that you're more than solvent, you're unwilling to share the bounty with the very people who helped your companies, the big three, be as prosperous and successful as they are.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think one of the questions people are going to have about your new org, We Are Somebody, is how you plan to raise a lot of money. I mean, now this has been a concern among the left for a long time. The logic, at least before the kind of Bernie campaign to 2016 and 2020, was that unlike more centrist or right-leaning political efforts, the interests of the left don't align with the interest of most of the wealthy people in the country. We're trying to obviously raise taxes on the rich, do a wealth tax, expand the social safety net, et cetera. And that those are things that are against the interests of the people who tend to contribute millions of dollars to political campaigns. Now, Bernie's campaigns, especially 2020, in which he outraised every other person in the Democratic primary, despite their willingness to take corporate dollars and millionaire, billionaire-backed bucks, indicated that there obviously is a wellspring of small dollar donations that can add up in a really, really big way. But I want to hear from you, what you've seen so far or what you anticipate being able to accomplish in terms of the raw fundraising of this.
Yeah, we have to try. I mean, we're going to use every lever of fundraising that we can. We're going to do grassroots dollars. We're going to do more wealthy dollars, do grant money, and also institutional type donors. I can tell you from working, on the Sanders campaign, you and I did that together in 2020. I was with him in 2016 as well, is that there are some ultra wealthy people who know that the way the system is operating, it is untenable and ultimately is a threat to everybody. There are some conscious minded. I mean, some of those folks donated to Senator Sanders, obviously, even though the bulk of our money came from grassroots. And some of those people actually donated to me when I ran for Congress. In that first race, I was able to raise $7 million. Now, here's the key. There's a difference between raising money as a candidate and raising money for an organization, which is a lot harder because the progressive base has been programmed, if you will, and I'm not using programming in a bad way. The progressive movement itself started based on a presidential run, and it was candidate based. And so I think the progressive movement is still very much driven by candidates. Another thing that We Are Somebody is going to do, Bridget, I'm getting back out here and I'm going to state to state. I'm going to get it back on the road, treating this like a campaign, is to try to get the progressive base to understand that we may not be able to accomplish a whole lot electorally. We're seeing it now, that people say one thing while they're running and they do another thing when they get elected. But I want to put that in the parking lot. There are ways, though, for us to have immense success without having any elected officials engaged. And that is primarily through ballot initiatives and what we're seeing the House of Labor do. And the other beautiful thing about the House of Labor, and I'm saying it very broadly, both unionized and non-unionized workers, is that in their workspaces, some of them voted for Senator Sanders, some of them voted for Secretary Clinton, some of them voted for President Obama, some of them voted for President Trump, some of them don't vote at all. Some of them are Black, white, Hispanic, the rainbow mosaic. But what they have in common is that they are being oppressed by a similar force. And that oppression forces them together by way they put aside their political ideology. That, Bree Joy, I think, is the sweet spot to deal both with class and caste. It is not lost on me. So everybody needs to understand this, that I understand that you cannot fully deal with the class dynamic without dealing with caste. And when I mean caste, I mean race. And when I'm talking about race, I'm primarily talking about anti-Blackness, which is the foundation to all the other isms that we have to fight in this country. My job as leader of this organization is not just the strike fund, is not just to organize and amplify. It is also going to be to educate and try to build a broad-based coalition outside of a currently elected personality, and to show the progressive base that we can have wins in real time and change material conditions in real time, and let other groups work to get more people elected that hopefully will have the intestinal fortitude to do what it is they said they were going to do when they get elected.
I mean, I definitely think it's the case that people, at least in my audience, let's say, and I think a significant section of the left, feel a lot more optimistic about labor activity than electoral opportunities.
I do too.
And therefore might be more willing to start to put their dollars behind labor efforts than electoral efforts. But I should also give voice to the fact that I do think that part of what has driven a sort of a spending freeze in terms of political donations from these small dollar donors was the experience of giving to the Bernie campaign and being told that it was something more than a campaign, that it was in fact a movement and not just a candidate, and feeling like those promises weren't really borne out. And I've heard that over the last couple of years as I've covered various congressional races and asked about people's interest in funding those races. And there was a lot of pessimism about the fact of being a low wage earner and giving your hour, 2 hour, 3 hour salary in terms of a $7 or $27 donation to a cause that ultimately ended up not having legs. So I wonder how much you've heard from people about that, and whether or not you have any concerns about your ability to fundraise, given there's that sort of pessimistic sentiment out there.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm going against a tidal wave, and I understand that. But this is where something that James Baldwin once said is very instructive for this moment, when he said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Yes, I could have sat back and said, oh my God, let me wait till I decide whether I'm going to run for another office again. Or I could say, here's a need, here's an opening. How can I use my leverage to show not just our movement, but to show everyday Americans that things can change, and the power in a lot of cases is in our hands, and we don't have to sit back and wait for the right elected official or right group of elected officials who will have intestinal fortitude to get things done. So yes, Brijo, it is true. I hear it. I hear it all the time. I know that makes the endeavor of We Are Somebody a lot harder, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. I would rather say that I got out here and tried than to say I sat back because of fear and I didn't try when I see a need, and I still have both the national and international cachet necessary to do this. And that is why I'm getting back out on the road, because I want people to see me, be able to touch me, be able to hear me, and get them as amped up as I am able to do. I need them to believe again, not just believe in individuals who are elected, but to believe that we as individuals, whether you identify as progressive or not, if you are a working class person and you don't have a sugar daddy or sugar mama or sugar somebody, we are all in this together. Some of us are blessed to be at the top of the hierarchy of the working class. Some are in the middle, or some at the bottom. But bet your bottom dollar, most of us work for a living, and we have to work for a living. And in that, there is some solidarity.
Senator Turner, you just alluded to, decision making around whether or not you might run for office again. When you were teasing We Are Somebody, a lot of people were wondering if you were in fact teasing a campaign announcement. How seriously are you thinking about running for office again? And do you think it would be, even hypothetically, do you think it would probably be still in the House of Representatives, or are you looking elsewhere?
I'm looking elsewhere. I'm looking at a couple of places right now. I think, I mean, I did an excellent job. I was very good at it, and I enjoyed the work, even though it was very hard, because I am the type of person that I'm going to do what I think is right. And if other people don't agree, that's on them. But I got to be able, there's an ultimate power in my mind that I answer to at the end of the day. I may run again. I'm not all cards on the table. And yes, a lot of people, I got so many calls, Rejoice, so many text messages. And some people were delighted to see that the announcement was an organization, and others were really disappointed. And they let me know many people want me to run. There's not a day that goes by, or let me just say a week that goes by, where somebody is not saying to me they wish that I would run again. I was just recently in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, there with some striking UAW workers too, in New York. Like everywhere I go, Rejoice, to this very day, people are asking me, am I going to run again? So I want them to hear here first on your show that all options are on the table for me. But I don't just want to get out there and just run for anything. I got to make sure it's not necessary. I mean, you run in the win. And I've sacrificed a lot, as you know, and many of your viewers have know 2 presidential campaigns, 2 back-to-back congressional runs. And we know that the forces came at me very hard. And I am often reminded that they came at me so hard because they know what I would do once elected to office. I'm going to stand by my word.
I do want to talk about that just a little bit if we could, because those of us who were following it understood that you were up significantly in the polls before APAC, DMFI put millions of dollars against you and for Shontel Brown in your race. And that has been a pattern across the country where APAC has specifically targeted left-leaning, specifically targeting Black and brown left-leaning candidates because of their support of the people of Palestine and ending Israel's occupation there. And in fact, it hasn't been limited to Black candidates. Notably, Andy Levin, a Jewish candidate who was, I understand, I think a synagogue leader, something like that.
Yes, he was
deeply involved in his own religious community, had his campaign ended after APAC aligned against him. I think Summer Lee was one of the few that were able to survive the APAC success rate. I think they have a 98% success rate in races that they enter. This is not a problem that's going away, and in fact may become more acute because of the ongoing crisis in Gaza since October 7th. So I wonder if you are looking ahead, not just for your own candidacy, but for the candidacy of a number of progressive incumbents that are now being targeted by their fellow members of Congress, et cetera, because of taking a stand in defense of the people of Palestine's right to exist. How you reckon the left is going to start to get around that, if it can get around that?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. There's no doubt about it. I mean, as you laid it out, and my race became the template. When the leader of DMFI was interviewed, he made it very clear that I think they may have called it the Ohio 11 strategy. And Congresswoman Lee benefited from time, right? Her and her team were able to see what happened to me. And then also the forces supporting her, institutional forces, came out a lot stronger on her behalf. And I am so glad that happened for her. But as you just laid out, a lot of them, including herself, they're being targeted again. I see this in a multifaceted way. The progressive left is going to have to mature tactically and strategically. We have to admit that we are infants in this game. I mean, it blossomed. The genesis of the 20th century or 21st century, progressive movement came in 2016. Those are the facts. It is still an infant, this movement, compared to neoliberalism and other structures that have been around a lot longer than the progressive movement. So the movement itself, and I don't know the how, is going to have to mature tactically and strategically, because we fight not only forces that are against progressivism, we're also the neoliberals, but we're fighting multi-front wars God, I even hate to use the word war at this point, Bree Joyce. So let me back that up. We're fighting on multiple fronts. And it is very hard for a new movement to be able to do that without maturing and getting some sophistication on how we deal with it. On the bright side of this, we have shown through both candidacies of Senator Bernard Sanders, and also in my first race that you alluded to, that special election in May of 2021, I was up 30 points and they walked me down. And one of the reasons why they were able to walk me down or walk us down, because I want to shout out all the people across this country who were right there with me, is because that vacancy, there was not an official vacancy because now Secretary of HUD, Marcia Fudge, had not been appointed. And so, but that made in lie that the governor of the state could not give a date. Had that race been in May of 2021, I would be Congresswoman Nina Turner. And they came at me because I am a humanitarian. I was threatened. I was called by prominent Jewish leaders who I had worked with in my city, told that I must disavow the squad, overlaid their disdain for the squad on me, even though I wasn't in Congress. You know, I served in the Ohio Senate, these very areas, part of Ohio 11th was my Senate district. And I got to tell you, Bree Joy, it was one of the most painful moments, you know, of my professional life, to have people who know me, who I serve, to tell me I must disavow some people for some things that they said that they didn't agree with. The only thing that I've ever said, and I will continue to say, is that I believe in justice and security for Palestinians, and I believe in justice and security for Israelis. Period. That's all I ever said. And I was labeled, you know, as you know, I mean, you saw what happened to me, and it was very, very chilling. In that special election, 4,000 Republicans crossed over. I mean, it was so bad, people crossed over. I have emails that were shared with me by some of my Jewish allies of how organized locally some forces in the community were to come up against me to stop my candidacy simply because I am a humanitarian and I care very much about the Ohio 11th district. So the people that would elect me here.
I mean, as we speak, there are a number of conservatives and probably, frankly, some blue dog Democrats who are angling for Rashida Tlaib to resign. I'm looking at a Newsweek article titled "Rashida Tlaib faces growing MAGA calls to be expelled, quote, the enemy within." But at the same time, when you talk about the strategic moves that progressives have to make, I am not blind to the fact that 66% of Americans agree with the left insofar as they agree with a call for a ceasefire.
Right.
So some of the controversy around Rashida Tlaib has to do with the ongoing debate, and this is a forensic debate that has new evidence coming out every other day, it seems, and is in no way settled, about who bombed the hospital last week or over the weekend. But what is not up for debate is the nature of the humanitarian crisis, the 18 humanitarian organizations that have labeled Israel an apartheid state, the UN and the majority of countries, of course, the U.S. vetoes it, but which support a ceasefire and are calling for some proportionality here as the number of Palestinians that have been killed since October 7th eclipses 6,000. That is something that the American people, I think, are increasingly understanding and getting behind, especially younger voters. So it does seem to me that strategically, the Democratic Party is working itself into a situation where it's going to have trouble winning a state like Michigan, where that has such a high Muslim and Arab population who are articulating their frustration with the Biden administration's stand on this. And I sometimes do wonder if the credible electoral threat that APAIC is able to leverage against candidates keeps them in a position where they neither openly appeal to the base that frankly agrees with them on these issues, or because of their principles, lean all the way in into just saying and doing exactly what APAIC wants them to do and say that they support Israel no matter what it does, no matter how many international laws it violates, and no matter how many civilians it kills.
Yeah, definitely a complicated. It's complicated and it's not complicated. The portion that's not complicated is the humanitarian side of this. Leave no doubt that you cannot say that you care about the deaths on one side and you don't care about the deaths on the other side. What Hamas did was horrendous. Targeting civilians is horrendous. Matter of fact, it's cowardice. Got that. Is there a way for Israel to more surgically go in? And I heard Kyle Kaminsky lay this out, quite nicely, so I don't have to recreate the wheel on this, but to use special ops in a way that lessens collateral damage. So what Hamas did was horrific, and they should answer for that. Now, at the same time, targeting innocent Palestinian citizens for something Hamas did is wrong. It is wrong. Turning off their electricity, taking away their water. 50% of the people who live in the Gaza are under the 15 years and under, meaning they have nothing to do with the Hamas leadership. And something that former Labor Secretary Robert Reich said, that we should not, taking retribution out on innocent people is not the way to go. It is morally wrong, and it breaks international law. And the United States of America is complicit here. We are the ones who can say to our ally, Israel, we need a ceasefire. But instead of that, they do the opposite. And they also hedge on who lives matter. The killing of innocent Israelis is wrong, and the killing of innocent Palestinians is wrong. And targeting soft targets where they are is wrong. And then using the excuse saying, well, Hamas uses their people for human shields. If in fact that is the case, then does that give you the right? If you already know this, then does that then give you the right? Does that absolve them from doing the right thing and not using innocent Palestinians as human shields? Like, make it make sense for me, Bree Joy. This does not make sense to me. And I'm going to tell you this, and I want the viewers to understand that people can agree or not agree. There is going to be a ripple effect, that it will not just be us who are walking this earth right now who will have to answer for these atrocities. It will be generations yet unborn. It's generations here, like my grandbabies, will have to answer for this for generations to come, because the United States of America lacked the courage to call for a ceasefire so we can regroup, so that you can target Hamas in a way that decreases the collateral damage. Even our colleague, Bree Joy, David Sirota, who is Jewish, he is out there pushing this thing. Marianne Williamson, I don't agree with everything she has said about this, but one of the major things that she has said, and she's running for president and Democrat, she said, an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. Those of us who really love humanity but detest what Hamas did, you can't say that you have a love for people when you think it is okay to kill innocent Palestinians indiscriminately, the way that it is going on right now. The world is going to ultimately answer to this, Bree Joy, and I fear that a WW3 could form because of this. So nobody is going to be unscathed from this. To save innocent Israelis is to save innocent Palestinians. To save innocent Palestinians is to save innocent Israelis. Those two things go together. And for the life of me, I can't understand what this president is doing.
Yeah, when you hear what was the recent statement from John Kirby, I think some days ago, where he seems to tacitly acknowledge, there's going to be all the civilian death. He said, we're supporting something we know is wrong. Like there's this acknowledgement that all those civilian deaths are wrong.
This is war. It is combat. It is bloody. It is ugly, and it's going to be messy. And innocent civilians are going to be hurt going forward. I wish I could tell you something different. I wish that wasn't going to happen, but it is going to happen. And that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it dismissible. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to still express concerns about that and do everything we can to help the Israelis do everything they can to minimize it. But that's unfortunately the nature of conflict.
There's also this acknowledgement. Israel says it had no idea that Hamas had been planning this attack for all of this time. It doesn't know where they are. It says they're underground in caves and tunnels, that these airstrikes are not hitting them. They are now fully killing members of the family of a former Congress member. And there still is not yet more than 13 Congress members who have signed on to this request for a ceasefire, and the UN is vetoing the U.S. rather at the UN is vetoing calls for a ceasefire, saying that is in contradiction with Israel's right to defend itself. I think there needs to be more scrutiny on what it means for a country to be defensive as opposed to offensive. But this is also germane to Bernie world. 300 plus Bernie former staffers, including myself, signed this petition calling for Bernie to join the calls for a ceasefire. Are you surprised that he hasn't done so yet?
I am. I mean, the senator certainly has positioned himself as a moral consciousness, and I think in many ways he still is. I'm not sure what he's struggling with. I want to try to give him the benefit of the doubt. You and I know, and probably many viewers know, the history of his family, his father's side of the family in particular, and the extermination, and him growing up as a young man among that generation. He was a young man, but he got a chance growing up to hear the stories of that generation that suffered that atrocity. So I'm not sure what the senator is thinking right now. I definitely applaud the 330 plus and growing former staffers who had the courage to say to the senator, we believe in you. You are the one who can get this done. And hopefully he will take this in consideration. All the other things that he has been saying has been right on the mark for the most part. I don't understand, Brie Joy, maybe you can enlighten me. I don't, not just him, I just don't understand not wanting a ceasefire to be able to save lives and strategically go after Hamas. Because nobody is saying, at least I'm not saying that. I'm not, go after Hamas all you want, but you got to decrease the collateral
Well, because they know they can't. They know that the implications of a ground invasion are to draw in these other neighboring Arab states that have said that they were willing to commit to exactly that. And this crisis is going to get exacerbated. There's an understanding, a full knowledge that Israel is not equipped to successfully engage on the ground in that way. Hezbollah has much more seasoned and trained fighters, not to mention that they would be fighting on Hamas's turf. And they do have the tactical advantage within Gaza, unlike the kind of airfare war that Israel has been waging on Gaza for the last decades. On the ground, things are a lot more equal, and there is evidence from historical precedent that this will not go well for Israel if they try it. So they're trying not to minimize, they're not trying to minimize casualties or civilian casualties in Gaza. They're trying to minimize Israeli casualties, even if it comes at the expense, Israeli military casualties, right? They're trained military casualties at the expense of the civilians of Gaza. A choice is being made to say, we don't want to sacrifice soldiers' lives. We would rather sacrifice the innocent men, women, and children of Gaza instead. So that's the calculation that's been made. And apparently for political reasons, any departure from that is being characterized as somehow wanting a genocide of Israel, or that somehow that is akin to not allowing them to defend itself, as though we're talking about them defending themselves against a colony, a open air prison that they have complete control of from an infrastructural perspective, the blockade, food, energy, all the things that we've been discussing.
And none of that is true. Talking to people like Madir Benjamin, who you know as well, and others, Jewish Voices for Peace, Code Pink, again, our very own David Sirota, and so many others of our Jewish sisters and brothers and family and friends who have had the courage, despite the pain of this, to say that in order for us to really lessen the damage and the deaths of Palestinians, and I will continue to say Israelis, is to call for a ceasefire. It is the most humanitarian thing to do. So, Bridget, I guess some of this stuff just does not compute for me, and maybe I don't want it to, because it's hard to sleep at night knowing that innocent people are being starved out, no water, doctors can't do their job, mothers are still birthing babies. I read one quote, and I forgot, I think this was a leader within the UN, but it was a leader, and basically said, babies they come when they come. And can any of us put ourselves in those positions that if we were in the Gaza, and if it were us, we would want the world to say, no, do not kill innocent people. Let's back up and rethink this thing. And other things, and I have friends of mine, associates who say Hamas brought this, and they're at fault. Hamas is at fault for their actions. I'm never going to say that they're not. And though, is it okay for innocent people to pay for what Hamas is doing? You have Israeli leaders calling them human animals, and just this dehumanizing Palestinian people. When you dehumanize somebody, you make it a lot easier for atrocities to happen to them. For me, that just doesn't sit right. So for the people that it does sit right, God help us, but it just does not sit right. And I want everybody to put themselves in that position. Even they were the innocent Israeli folks where Hamas attacked. Same thing. Put yourself in that position, because there are some people on the left, Rejoy, as far as I'm concerned, lost their minds and think that, some of that stuff was okay. It's not okay. The history of that area is not okay in terms of Palestinians not being able to control, their own destiny. But it does not give Hamas the right to do what they did. The killing of innocents is wrong all the way across the board. And then for the United States, though, see, that's the thing. We are never going to live this down. History is not going to be kind to our country.
Yeah, I mean, the rationale that's being articulated for why the disproportionality is fine and why the civilian deaths are okay is identical to the rationale that Osama bin Laden articulated after 9/11. That Americans voted for George Bush, that we are responsible for all of the crimes of all of America's leaders, and that therefore the people in the Twin Towers were not civilians. That is almost verbatim the rationale that is being presented by Zionists and the defenders of what's going on right now when there's a discussion of civilian casualties in Gaza. And that's without even laying on top of the fact that Gaza was already under occupation and was in a struggle long before October 7th that had been lasting for decades. So I really do appreciate you spending the time with me here today, Senator Turner. I just have one last question, just getting back to this new organization. I do also wonder, you had articulated, I think, in an interview with The Intercept, a desire to also organize and help push for certain pro-labor legislation like the PRO Act. Yeah. And I do wonder, in terms of strategy, how the group will pursue those kinds of goals. The defense, the explanation for why the Biden administration seemed not to move forward on the PRO Act was that Manchin and Sinema were holding it up. The numbers game in terms of representation in Congress hasn't gotten better for Democrats since then. And given the way Joe Biden is looking in polls for 2024, if the down ballot is affected by Joe Biden's popularity, it's probably not going to get any better in Congress when it comes to passing legislation there too. So how are you looking at the legislative goals here?
Well, we're going to collaborate with other organizations where that is their top focus. For us, it's not our major focus, but it is woven into the ultimate goal. Being out there, and movements need to understand movements are important, but ultimately we got to have policy behind the movement. Let me use the civil rights movement as an example. So the movement was there primarily of African-American folks, and we had allies from all walks of life, but make no mistake, it was driven by us. The policies that came out of the civil rights movement, named the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So we had movement on the ground, but we also had political will. That political will had to be forced. Even though it is not looking like, those types of things can happen immediately, that does not absolve us as our responsibility to continue to lay the foundation and continue to fight. There were many decades of foundation laid before we got the Civil Rights Act, many foundations of action laid and disappointed people and people who lost their lives before we actually got the Voting Rights Act. That's how I see this moment too, that we must continue to do the work and not get weary in well doing. We know what we are up against when it comes to trying to change systems, but we cannot abdicate our responsibility to do it. Every labor win is a beautiful thing. We still need the PRO Act. We still need it. So every win in that way. And so, and we have levers that we can pull on the state level and also local levels of government too, which may come to fruition a lot quicker than we do the federal government. It still does not absolve those of us who care about these issues and are putting efforts towards turning this thing around. We got to lay the foundation, because even when the win happens, it didn't happen in the vacuum. And oftentimes we don't go back and retrace the steps as to how we got there. There's a song in the African-American spiritual tradition, How I Got Over. My soul looks back and wonder how I got over. It is blood, it is sweat, it is tears. Justice is not pretty, it is messy. We talk about justice in this kind of angelic, celestial way, but when you really peel back the layers, we're fighting for economic, political, social justice or justice in other forms. It has never been pretty. So we're going to be out there fighting and collaborating with others who have this on their agenda as the number one agenda, Bree Joy. And then we're going to also continue organizing in that labor space. Again, I believe that that is the space that we can get some more racial justice things done and definitely class justice. And so I do want people to join us. Cannot do it without you all. We do need money for the mission. And I want them to go to not Nina Turner. Well, yeah, you can go to Nina Turner on Twitter and all the social media. But I need you to go to wearesomebody.org. And lastly, Bree Joy, and hopefully we'll have a part 2. We got to stop putting our hopes so much in one or two elected officials. People fail us. That doesn't make them bad people, but people fail us. And so we got to find other ways. Most of the greatest people who got things done in this country historically never once held elected office, but they were able to move people. I am very good at moving people. I think that this is a work worth doing. And so I'm going to be out there doing this work. And hopefully it is as successful as I'm going to put the effort in to make it be.
Well, so I know that I'll speak for myself. I very much appreciate your dogged commitment to these issues. I know what hard work it is to campaign. I've seen you do it back to back, if you include the Bernie runs and then your own runs. And I know it's very thankless. I think there is a perception sometimes in the public that people do things out of self-aggrandizement because it's fun. And, I think I've heard Marianne say there's much easier ways to sell books.
That's right.
And much less costly ways from your own, if you're not one of these people who's a millionaire or billionaire running for office.
Well, Bree, you were out there too. So let me just shout you out. You, and I shout you out all the time. I admire your courage and your intellect. And the icing on the cake is that you are a young Black woman. You are young, you are Black, and you are gifted, and therefore you are it. And others who are in the same spirit of this, you could be doing something else. You are an attorney by trade. There's certainly easier ways for you to make money too.
That is true.
But you are out there doing the thing just like me. And so many others that we can't, we don't have the time within the show to name them. But I just want to take this moment to lift you up, because it's not easy doing the work that you do. And I just commend you. See, it's all of us though, doing what we can do where we are, but what we have to be that kind of change that we want to see in the world. Everybody doesn't have to do the same thing, but make no mistake about it. Having you out there, having me out there, and so many others combined, it definitely does make the difference. It's not pretty. It does not feel good, but yet we continue to push forward because we come from a heritage.
Yeah. It really does feel like the least one can do when you look at the gravity of the injustices that are happening around the world. And I feel very privileged to be in a position to at very least be a mouthpiece for some of those concerns. And I know you feel that way as well. So thank you again for spending the time with us today, Senator Turner. We'll put the links to where you can go and find We Are Somebody on the internet in the show notes. Thank you all for staying around and listening to this today and for supporting Bad Faith Podcast as well. Take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.